Oh God. Hey y'all, howdy, welcome to One for the Books. I'm Sandra Broadwell. In the month of October, I read 6 books and I hauled a crapload. Those came from 3 different sources. So I'm going to be talking about all of that in this video. If you would like to just skip ahead to the haul or look for a specific book review, I have timestamps for everything down below. I'm also a little bit sick, so excuse me if you hear me like clearing my throat a lot in this video. This month I also bought book tabs and annotated some of my books for the very first time because I used to write in books a lot when I was in high school and I kind of fell out of that habit as I fell out of the habit of reading. I see so many other booktubers that annotate their books and I feel like it's so helpful, especially as a booktuber, to be able to look back at the books that you've read and see your notes about them and how that would help me like reform my thoughts when I'm ready to make these videos. So in the month of October, I read 6 books. So I'm going to go through these books in the order that I read them. The first book that I read is Lark Ascending by Silas House. This is a dystopian book where a young man named Lark is trying to escape the United States as a cultural and climate change refugee. Basically, evangelical extremists have taken over the political landscape in the United States, and there's also been some incredible climate catastrophes, and it has made it basically unlivable for Lark and his family in this near future United States type of situation. Lark is a 19-year-old gay man. His family all tries to escape to Ireland, where they will supposedly find a country willing to accept refugees. And so that's the basic plot. I did annotate this book. I have 3 different color annotations. In this book, I used red to indicate grief. Blue were just like passages that I really, really loved and thought were super beautiful. And then my green tabs are anywhere that the author Silas House actually used the phrase green. He references the color green so much in this book, and specifically the phrase glowing green, if he's describing like how beautiful the natural setting is around them. And I just thought that was really interesting. The book cover itself is also green, and there's kind of this greenish waterfall on the front. And so there's just this whole kind of green theme throughout the book. The writing is so beautiful. This was my first time ever reading Silas House, and I will definitely be picking up more of his books in the future. This is one of the best books that I have read all year. I gave it a 5 stars. It's a really kind of deep look at grief. There are some really, really sad things that happen in this book. And the way that Silas House kind of explores grief through this dystopian lens, and it has some family, it has some found family. There is an animal companion, like a little beagle dog that Lark finds as he's on this journey. And it's all just, it's so sweet and hard. And so if any of that sounds interesting to you, definitely give this book a try. It just came out at the end of September, and so I was so excited to read this. It was the only book that I've ever pre-ordered so far, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. I just absolutely loved reading this book. Next up, I read The Business of Being a Writer by Jane Friedman. I am a little bit of a Jane Friedman fangirl because I am attempting to be a writer for myself, and she is kind of the guru. She's been in the publishing industry for over 20 years, and she just is a wealth of knowledge and information about the entire publishing industry and what it's like to publish a book and self-publishing and traditional publishing and the kind of the history of all of that. All of that is kind of wrapped up in this book. She also has a really amazing website and blog. So if you're interested in being a writer whatsoever, definitely hit up her website as well, because she just has so many resources, and her whole thing is like helping people navigate publishing. So I just really enjoyed this. It did kind of a deep dive on how writers can make money, and it went everywhere from novelists to freelance writers to journalists and everything in between. So it was pretty dense and not super exciting, but it's definitely the type of book that's meant to be read as like a you pick and choose the chapters that are helpful and interesting to you and the type of writing that you're doing. It's not a read cover to cover type book, but I did read it cover to cover just because I'm fascinated by all of this information. So for anyone who is interested in writing, I would consider this a must read. Next up, I read 2 Halloween books, and I have a whole vlog dedicated to these 2 books, so I won't talk about them in huge detail, but that was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley and The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I loved The Once and Future Witches. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Honestly, the only reason it didn't get 5 stars from me was because the pacing was a little slow, but it's absolutely fantastic. It follows the 3 Eastwood sisters who have been estranged from each other because of a very traumatic childhood that they shared. They get back together kind of during the women's suffragist movement in 1893 and attempt to bring witchcraft back so that women can have more power, because at this time in history, they have, of course, absolutely no power or cultural influence as women. It said a lot of interesting things about race and power and structure and gender. So I thought it was masterfully done. It was a great tale about witches. It felt very real in that, it actually focused somewhat on the witchcraft itself and what it means to be a witch. It was not spooky, but it was a good spooky season read. And in my vlog, I also did 2 themed activities for both of these books. I did 2 witch themed activities for this and 2 Frankenstein themed activities for Frankenstein. So if you're interested in seeing any of that, definitely check out my vlog. Frankenstein, I ended up giving about a 3.5 stars. I liked it a lot, but it was not really what I expected. This is the 1831 edition. It has some amazing illustrations in it from Bernie Wrightston, who is a famous comic book and graphic artist illustrator. So it has some really great illustrations in it throughout. So I highly recommend checking this version of the book if you're interested in reading Frankenstein, because I felt like the illustrations enhanced my reading experience. The book itself didn't explore the themes of playing God and what it means to be human as deeply as I wanted it to. I've heard that the 1818 edition of Frankenstein does a better job of that, and so I might be interested in checking that out in the future. But overall, very, very happy that I read this book. The second to last book that I got to in October was The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. This book definitely wins one of the best covers of the year. I absolutely adore the artwork on this. It's just so colorful and cute. And that's also how I describe the book, colorful and cute. It is about an orphanage that is isolated on an island for kind of mutant or magical children, and other orphanages can't handle them. The main character in this book is a man named Linus, who is an inspector for the department in charge of magical youth, and he is basically going to make sure everything is in shipshape at this orphanage. It has, again, a lot of found family vibes. It has some LGBTQ plus storylines. The relationships formed in this book are very wholesome and sweet. Overall, I just felt like this book was a little too sweet. It was just super predictable. It was a little like on the nose with its storyline. I knew exactly how it was going to end pretty much from the beginning, and it felt a lot like watching a gay Hallmark Christmas movie about mutant children. I read it really quickly, and so I did enjoy my reading experience wholeheartedly, but I kind of think of it as a little bit forgettable overall. The last book that I picked up for the month of October was A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan, which is the first book in the Memoirs of Lady Trent series, which I think has 5 books in the original series, and then there's like a 6th book that I think follows like a big time jump. This book obviously has a super beautiful cover, and that's honestly one of the reasons that I picked up the book to begin with. So the concept behind A Natural History of Dragons is that this woman, Lady Trent, whose name is Isabella, is this old kind of like Jane Goodall-esque character. She is an extremely well-renowned scientist and naturalist who was like the first person to really study dragons. The time that she was living, women weren't really supposed to be in science. It's a very Victorian era fantasy, and so women are pretty much at the mercy of their husbands about how much freedom and leeway they have in their life to pursue their own pleasures. And Isabella is this very scientifically minded fascinated person. This series of books are her memoirs in which she looks back at her life and retells the story of how she became this like famous, larger than life Lady Trent character. And so this first book covers Isabella's early life as a child and then up through her marriage and her first kind of mission where she goes to study dragons. I just absolutely adored this. I am someone with a bachelor's degree in science. I have always been extremely fascinated by natural history and natural sciences. Even when I was a little girl, there's passages in here as a young girl, she's going off on hunts that she's not supposed to be on and like dissecting animals that she found that were dead. And I'm the type of kid that was like running around catching like bumblebees and lizards and mice and like bringing them home and mason jars to show my parents and then taking them back out to release them into the wild. So I just absolutely related to Isabella so hard. So this was another one that I annotated, mostly just because like the parts that I annotated in this book, I was just like, oh, like that's exactly me. Like that is me. I think her and I would just be good friends. We have a lot in common. And so I definitely don't think this book is for everyone. It is not like this swashbuckling heroic tale. It really is just like the story of this young woman's life in a Victorian era where women are very repressed, and she ekes out this existence for herself on her own. If you're interested in pioneering women in science, or if you like historical fantasy, if you like dragons, all of that kind of stuff, then this is definitely a book that you should check out. And I definitely think this is underrated. I give this 5 stars. I can't wait to read more of this series. I'm definitely going to be continuing on with it. So those are all of the books that I finished in October. So now I'm going to dive into this massive book haul. Oh my God. I have 2 books that I picked up from my buddy Shane, and one of them I'm borrowing. So I'll just talk about this one first. This is the only book of the book haul that I don't own, but this is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. The subtitle is Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. So this definitely sounds like it's up my alley. Of the like 200 plus books on my Goodreads TBR, it is in like the top 5 most highly rated books that I have not read. And so this has obviously extremely high praise, and Robin Wall Kimmerer is scheduled to come give a talk in my city in like April next year, and I wanted to make sure that I got around to reading this before she gets here. November is also nonfiction November, and so this is my nonfiction read for the month of November. So I want to be able to give this back to my buddy Shane to lend out to other people in plenty of time before she gets here. So that's the first book of the haul. The second book that I got from my buddy Shane, he let me keep because he had 2 copies of this book. Lost Mountain is a book that I read a long time ago when I was a freshman in college, and I credit this book with changing kind of the trajectory of my life. At the time, I was attending a school that I didn't really enjoy, that didn't have anything that particularly interested me as far as the majors that were available. And I read this book, Lost Mountain. It is about mountaintop removal, which is a really environmentally devastating coal mining practice that takes place throughout Appalachia. The idea behind mountaintop removal is that the coal companies basically like blow up the top of the mountain and then scrape all of the debris into the adjacent valleys. And so it's basically takes this mountainous terrain and like flattens it. It's obviously extremely devastating for the entire ecosystem, the waterways. It's just frankly evil. This book was really eye-opening for me. Generally, when people think of coal mining, they think of traditional kind of underground mines, and that's not the way that most mining happens in the United States. This really got my wheels spinning when I was a freshman in college, and it encouraged me to pursue a degree in science where I could do something that would give back to the environment, combat climate change more with my career trajectory. So I transferred schools and changed majors partially because of the impact that this book had on me. And when I told my friend Shane that story, he was like, well, I have 2 copies of that book and you don't have a copy, so you should have this one. So I don't imagine myself rereading this anytime soon, but I'm very happy to have it back on my shelves. The next 2 books that I picked up were from a little free library tour that I did. I have a video for this that is up already. So if you haven't checked out my little free library tour, watch that one. I went on a bike ride. I visited 10 different little free libraries, and I found these 2 books, which I have dedicated myself to reading before the end of this year. So the first one of those is Circe by Madeline Miller. This is supposed to be be a kind of Greek mythology retelling. That's basically all I know about it, other than it has really high praise. This is the same author that did The Song of Achilles, which is another really popular kind of Greek retelling. And so I've never read anything by Madeline Miller, but I thought this sounded really good. And so when I saw it at the Little Free Library, I picked it up, and my plan is to read this sometime before the end of 2022. The second book that I picked up on my Little Free Library tour is The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. Heather McGhee is a famous anti-racist advocate, as you can see from the subtitle, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. I think this is an examination of the economic impact of racism and how we can solve that. So I'm very excited to check this book out, hopefully also for nonfiction November. But if I only get around to one nonfiction this month, it's going to be Braiding Sweetgrass, because I feel the need to be able to return that to my friend since it's on borrowed time. The next 5 books that I picked up during the month of October all came from the International Book Project, which is a nonprofit here in my city that donates thousands and thousands and thousands of books to people in communities that are underserved. A lot of those communities are international. Some of them are here in the States, but at their storefront here in Lexington, they also have a little bookshop where they have books for sale, and all of the proceeds from those sales go to help fund their mission of serving underserved communities with books and literacy programs and things like that. So absolutely love the International Book Project. I actually interviewed their executive director earlier this year. You should definitely check out that interview. So the first book that I picked up in my International Book Project haul is The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson. I don't know too much about this book other than Kim Michelle Richardson is a Kentucky author, and this is historical fiction about a woman who tries to provide books. It's funny, it's similar now that I'm saying it to the International Book Project's mission itself, but I'm pretty sure it's historical fiction about a woman that tries to bring books and literacy to underserved haulers in Appalachia and like Eastern Kentucky and things like that. So that's pretty much all I know about it. I don't know when I'll get around to reading this, but the concept sounds very interesting to me. It's obviously from an author in my home state, so I will be reading this sometime, if not in the next couple of months, then definitely in 2023. The second book that I picked up from the International Book Project is Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. I honestly know almost nothing about what this is about. I know it is a fantasy, either tied to or related or retelling something to do with like African mythology. It got really high praise from the New York Times, and they did a whole deep dive on how books are printed and made in the United States. And they did it by following the trajectory of like this specific book. And so that's how I first learned about this. I will try and link that New York Times article down below because it was fascinating. It had lots of little video clips about the book printing process. But anyway, this is a 3-book series called the Dark Star Trilogy. This one and the second one have been published, and I think the third one is coming out next year. So it's high up on the list. The third book that I picked up from the International Book Project is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I'm realizing now that I have a kind of a similar theme with a lot of the books that I picked up. This one I think is something to do with Native American mythology or Native American historical fiction. I'm not really sure, but the cover is so beautiful. And this is also pretty much identical to the Black Leopard, Red Wolf book that I was just talking about. This is the first book in the series. The second book is already published, and I think the third book is also coming out in 2023. In addition to November being nonfiction November, November is also Native American Heritage Month, and Rebecca Roanhorse is a Native American author. So I do plan to read this month to fit the Native American Heritage Month theme. The second to last book that I picked up from the International Book Project is Pachinko by Minjin Lee. It does have a little bit of a torn up cover right here, but that's okay. I will tape it back together. That's what you get for getting used books sometimes. I'm not worried about it. I have heard amazing things about this book. I know it's kind of a cross-generational story set in Asia somewhere. Honestly, that's about all I know, but I've heard really great things. And when I posted a picture of the books that I bought on Instagram, one of my friends immediately commented and was like, oh my gosh, Pachinko, that's such an amazing story. So yes, this is going to be a really good read sometime soon. I'm running out of room to stack things over here. The very last book that I picked up is called 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. And I definitely picked this one up because this is the same author of The Once and Future Witches, which I just talked about. And I absolutely loved Alex Harrow's writing. So when I saw this at the International Book Project, I was like, I gotta have it. I gotta find out what else this author has going on. So this was my book haul for the month of October. Obviously, this one is borrowed. This one I read a long time ago, and I'm not planning to reread anytime soon, but these are all new books of mine that I will be attempting to read sometime in the next several months. So that's it for my October wrap up and book haul. Please let me know in the comments below what your favorite book for the month of October was, if you had any good spooky reads, or potentially what books you picked up for the month of November that you're very excited to read. Please like this video if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. As always, be kind, read books, and hit the subscribe button below. I'll see you next time.